not am I in some perfect Zen state of softness or calmness or,
Right.
substitute any other word of a place, a feeling we want, but am I connected to it? Like right now I'm wearing yoga leggings and those
Yep.
are soft. And so, right. And so that's a way, if I don't feel it in my body, to have it on my body at least.
Ooh.
Right. And it's, yeah, like we need to give ourselves those like on ramps.
So Maya, can you start off by telling me your HSP discovery story? How and when you realized that you're highly sensitive?
Yeah. So I wish I could remember exactly when it was. And I think that's just my HSP self wanting to be really particular about things. But it was about 6 or 7 years ago. Everything before the pandemic started is a little fuzzy time
Yeah.
wise. And I was doing some poking around about sensitivity. I was always one of those kids that was like, "Oh, you're so sensitive." I was very shy as a kid, very, very shy. And I just stumbled upon Elaine Aron's work, and it was one of those moments of like, "Oh, I didn't know about this." And by that point, I had been a therapist for about a decade already, and I had
Hmm.
never heard of it. And it took the little self-assessment, and it was just a light bulb moment of like, oh, this makes sense. Yeah,
Isn't it really a light bulb moment?
really. Oh my gosh.
And also, I've heard this from every single therapist. We don't learn about the trait in school,
Hmm. No, yeah, no,
right? And we're
no,
sitting
no.
with so many HSPs, and we
Hmm.
are ourselves one as well, but not having that information. Did it change anything when you had the framework? I'm always curious about this. Did
For
it,
myself or for how I work or both.
or anything really? Because, I think we always know something's different about me. I'm emotional, I'm
Mm.
sensitive, I'm shy, I'm introverted. But when you actually had the words, did it shift anything for you?
It did. And to be honest, it still is, right? It gave me
Yeah.
more language, it gave me the framework. The shyness sort of fell away in the last, well, when I wasn't looking, some point in the last decade or so. Although I have my moments and my, different contexts where I might be a little shy. But knowing that I'm HSP just gives me something to hold, something like tangible. It feels like, even though it's not actually tangible, of how I define myself, of how I move through the world. It feels actually, now that I think about it a little more, like it gives me permission. I have always been and continue to be honest, like a really hard worker. I grew up in a family that prized that over pretty much everything else. And realizing that I could push myself, but that it's not the best thing for me. And having the permission, but also having the reason of like, I'm sensitive and this doesn't work best for my nervous system. Honestly, no one else is really asking me for that. My husband is a lovely person. My friends are always supportive. Like, but for myself, really, to be
Yeah.
able to say, like, this is not what my HSP nervous system needs has been really significant.
Hmm. It is, isn't it? Just to know, oh, there's a reason why I might need to slow down or do things a little bit differently than everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and grappling with those values or the kind of the way of living of your family or, your
Mhm.
community of, okay, we're hard
Mhm.
workers.
Yeah, that's been a big piece of work for me,
Uh,
right? Like a big, and continues to be. Like there's a lot of unlearning, undoing. My father is an immigrant, so there's just, I think, baked into that, just, you work hard. He has retired a couple years ago, but was working like 60 hours a week up until he retired. Like
yeah.
that was what I saw growing up. That was modeled for me. Really, really hard work. And I think it's just modeled in a lot of immigrant families that hard work
Hmm.
gets you ahead. And that's what you do in a lot of families in general, right?
Hmm.
So to step out of that, like there were years when I was working 6 days a week as a therapist, which, spoiler, was not great for me. I don't think I was doing my best work.
Hmm.
I think also I was so focused on trying to do my best work that I left little for myself or for my loved ones. So I was completely spent,
Hmm.
which is
Yes,
just so hard for me. Yeah,
it is hard. All those other pieces of you get malnourished.
totally. That's a really good word for it. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
became a survival thing. Like I could push through. I learned, all these little like tips and tricks of at this time of day I get caffeine, and or
Right.
whatever. That's not a mind-breaking trick, but it came at a physical cost,
Yeah.
and it came at an emotional cost for
Mhm.
sure.
Absolutely, it really does. I'm curious, did anxiety play a part? Because I know that's something that you focus on, and I
Mhm.
just think about when you're pushing so hard, probably very overstimulated. What did you notice as a result of that? Was it anxiety? Was it something else?
My anxiety has been, looking back, it's been present for way longer again than I had
Mm-hmm.
language for it. So I think
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid and when I was labeled as shy and when I called myself shy, there was anxiety there as well. Um, and so when I was pushing myself really hard during those, it was like 4 or 5 years, my anxiety was higher. Now, was it higher because I was working a lot? Possibly. Um, but I think my anxiety has always also been connected to being hard on myself and believing, and this has changed significantly in the past couple of years. And but for a long time, there was this belief of, if I am mean to myself or if I just push myself, it's the pushing essentially, right? If I just
Yeah.
like push through, then I'll be okay, or I'll be worthy, or I'll be enough. And so my anxiety often manifested as being really hard on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And again, having just enough in the tank most of the time for other people in my life rather, but not enough for me. And so I was really, really mean to myself.
Hmm.
I would be really self-critical. There was a ton of self-doubt and negative, internal talk. And that's for the most part how my anxiety showed up. There was also periods of like insomnia and um, you know, disconnection from my body. But I think for the most part, and it got woven in and around my work life. I think not my work with clients necessarily, but my work life and building a private practice as an
Mm-hmm.
HSP. And when I figured out I was an HSP, that helped me connect a lot of the dots for how I wanted to have my practice look, because I
Mm-hmm.
can't see 30 clients a week, nor do I
Yeah.
want to.
Right.
But a lot of people around me do that. And
Yeah.
it's been so eye-opening to realize that I don't have to and that I don't want to.
Mm-hmm. Right. But you don't have to do either.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think a lot of folks, anxiety shows up that way, and that self-criticism where it's
Mhm.
like push, push, push through. Um, how do we grapple with that when you come from a hardworking family where that's the value?
Mhm.
So kind of two generations out, but my mom's side, that's kind of the same mentality. Like, and my grandmother always says, we should be doing, right? Doing is a good thing.
Right.
She's happiest when she's doing something, which
Yeah.
I do appreciate that value, and it's gotten me really far. However, it's not sustainable
Right.
when you go at that level. So how do we grapple with trying to be kinder to ourselves, but also trying not to, trying to meet the family's needs or expectations?
Totally.
It's
Yeah, I think it's such a great question. I'm not going to pretend to have like the answer,
right.
but I think for me, finding that mix, right? Because the reality of my life and of the world is that we do need to get stuff done, right? Like
Huh.
that's just when I figure out a way to not have to do things, I
Let
I
me
don't know what
know.
I'll do with that. Yeah, I will let you know. But for me, there's a big physical awareness to, and I'm noticing it even as I'm leaning back. And I noticed it before when I was driving. If I am leaning too far forward,
Mhm.
that's usually a sign that I am in like complete doing mode, that I am pushing. It's almost, and I've written a little bit about this, it's almost like, it's really like there's a hand between my shoulder blades that's pushing me forward.
Mm.
And so when I can relax back or lay down and let my back soften, that it really is this really important somatic signal of like releasing, softening. And so I can have a little bit of both, right? I can be in this moment talking to you, gesturing because that's just how I talk.
Yep.
But also the back of my body is soft right now,
Yeah.
right? And so it allows like a little bit of like the doing and being, or the,
Mm.
output and input, whatever we want to call it, right? But just a little bit of that blend. And for me, it really, that was something I noticed years ago at this point, and it's something I keep coming back to.
I love that. We can blend the doing and the being. It's so
Hmm.
beautifully put. You can be engaged in the world without burning yourself out.
Yeah.
You can have a practice but not see 30 clients a week,
Right.
right? Uh, what has helped you s- make that blend happen? You know, is there been certain practices or things that you tell yourself to soften into that blending and not always being doing?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a practice for me.
Yeah,
So even though it's been, quite a few years since I discovered that, like I have my moments, like we all do, of like, oh, I'm holding my breath and I'm leaning, like I'll find myself
right,
writing notes like this. I'm like, that's not helping me type any fast.
right.
And it's not making it any more enjoyable. So practices that have been helpful for me, some of it is just the mindfulness of like, what is my body doing right now?
Mhm.
Am I connected to softness? Other things have been being in nature. I'm a big hiker. Um, and really just things that help me experience my physical body in a different way. Because so often, and when we're doing right, it's all like forward motion, right? In one way or another, whether we're walking or we're typing or we're therapizing or whatever, like it's a lot of forward motion.
Yeah.
And so I have found it helpful for this. Before the pandemic, and then a couple of years ago, I got back into aerial yoga. And for
Mhm.
anyone who is not familiar with aerial yoga, and I'm not an expert, but I do love to go upside down,
Yes.
which is not something that's in my non-aerial yoga practice because of my like shoulder and jaw stuff. And there's something so freeing about the experience of going upside down. Spine decompresses, and it's just also you have to soften a little
Mm.
because you can clench when you're upside down, and it's our natural impulse often because we're like, this is not how our human bodies usually hang out.
Right.
But when I can soften into that, it is so juicy. It's so delicious.
Mm.
And it helps me remember. It helps, but more than just in a cognitive sense, it helps my body remember and know, right, that there are other ways of being in the world.
Mhm.
So that's one of my favorites.
I love that. Right, changing your perspective.
Literally. Yeah.
Literally. Yeah, I remember it was a couple years ago. I have a friend who's a yoga teacher, and we were just kind of playing around in the studio after, and we were in a studio that had the straps on the wall, and I got to go
Mm-hmm.
upside down, and it was
Mm-hmm.
amazing.
Yeah,
It feels so good just let your body relax and release.
totally.
Mm.
Yeah. And connected to that, like my favorite part of an aerial yoga class in the studio where I was taking it is you do the shavasana in the hammock.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's like it's the best shavasana. Like I would literally pay for an hour of just laying in the hammock like
Yes.
that, and that would be amazing. But this sense of again, it's that duality of like being held
Yeah.
and releasing, right? We
Hmm.
always, I think, I know I always have this impulse to do more than I need to do, and I think that's the hardworking family, but also the anxiety showing up
Yeah.
of like do produce, get validation, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so to be able to soften, whether it's being in nature or being upside down in an aerial yoga class or petting my dog, who
Hmm.
is another huge resource for me, and all of that helps me remember that I can soften, right?
Mm.
That I have that capacity because it's easy to forget.
Oh, it's so easy, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Like it is possible to kind of slow down and instead of leaning forward and constantly going, 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 it's like you asked a lovely question, which is, am I connected to softness?
Yeah.
I want to start asking myself that question.
It's such a good one, right? Because there's also like so much nuance that's possible in that. I was playing with this with a couple of clients recently of am I connected to it? Not am I in some perfect Zen state of softness or calmness or,
Right.
substitute any other word of a place, a feeling we want, but am I connected to it? Like right now I'm wearing yoga leggings and those are
Yep.
soft. And so, right. And so that's a way, if I don't feel it in my body, to have it on my body at least.
Ooh.
Right. And it's, yeah, like we need to give ourselves those like on ramps, right? Of
Oh,
like,
yeah.
because it can get so, I find for myself, for a lot of my clients, if I don't find the feeling internally right away, it's like, well, fuck it.
Right.
I'm not connected to softness, screw this. I'm going to go, you know, still be anxious.
Right.
Um, so having that on ramp and having that, well, there's 5% of softness, arbitrary number, right? But just some sense of it, some little glimmer.
Yes, I love that. Like, even if you're not able to embody it right now, how can you connect
Yeah,
externally? That on-ramp to
totally.
softness.
Yeah, I
And
love that phrase. Yeah, I don't think I'd ever said that one before.
it's so good.
Yeah.
I wrote it
Yeah.
down. I was like, I want to remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also wearing soft pants right now because it's
Mhm.
comforting, right? It's like, oh,
Totally.
how can we?
Yeah.
Or like sometimes I'll have my little weighted lap pad
Mhm.
on me, or just something, or cozy socks on. It's like, what can we bring in to resource?
Totally. I think there's often this idea that resourcing everything has to come from inside. We have to dig deep, and that's the working hard piece, right? We have to
Right.
dig deep and find the feeling. And I am just such a huge proponent for myself and my clients of what can you bring in? Like when you mentioned like the little weighted lap band, like I have a heating pad for my neck that is velvet.
Ooh,
And it's just, yes, it's warm and it has some weight to it and that's lovely, but it's velvety, like the
yes.
softest velvet. And it's like, oh, okay, you know? And sometimes I'll just sit there and I'll like have it on and I'll just be petting it because it's so, so soft. So like we deserve those reminders, those on ramps.
Yeah.
It's okay to need that and to not have to
Mhm.
like manifest or dig deep and find it just from inside all the time.
Yes, exactly. We don't have to work so hard.
Yeah.
Yes, and that it's okay to have that imperfection happening. Like, yes, it could be a day where you're completely frazzled and there's no way in.
Mhm.
That's okay. Borrow it from somewhere else.
Totally. Oh, I love that. Yeah, borrow it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
it seems like it's a lot, as you're talking, like a lot of sensory soothing.
Totally. I'm a very sensory person. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It just has always made a lot of sense to me, you know?
Hmm. Right. It does make sense because we're so, especially as HSPs, where we're so perceptive to those
Hmm.
little nuances of touch and smell and sight. And you
Hmm.
talked about, nature, animals,
Hmm.
clothing, all these pieces. I'm curious if we could also bring into the conversation kind of music and the
Yeah,
sensory language, because I know that's something that you
totally.
bring in a lot.
Yeah,
Could you talk more about how that could be supportive to us?
totally. There are so many ways. So as a music therapist, there are so many ways that I work with my clients to bring music into the conversation, literally.
Yeah.
One of the ways that that might be if we stay with softness, that it's so hard for people to access softness. And I'd say 90% of my clients come in with anxiety. A lot of them are HSPs. And softness feels very foreign, sometimes very threatening, right? It
Yeah.
is it is a surrender. There's a little bit of a surrender or a lot
Hmm.
of surrender, depending on so many factors, right?
Yeah.
And so music can be a more accessible way. It's certainly for a lot of people, it's much more accessible than close your eyes and find softness inside. That doesn't even make sense to a lot of people, and that's totally fine because it's not the world we live in.
Right.
So we might, if I'm working with someone in person, it might be what sort of instrument connects you to softness? And I might, invite them to try a couple of instruments in my office, or I might just play a couple and say, does that sound soft?
Hmm.
Right? Because sound, like even soft in terms of like loud or quiet makes
Right.
sense, but also then we
Mm-hmm.
can start to talk about soft as texture. And that's where
Ooh.
it gets musically gets really juicy
Mm-hmm.
because a soft texture, a timbre, um, it can be like that warm, rounded piece of music. Like I was just listening to something before that has it was an oboe was the
Ooh.
instrument,
Uh-huh.
which has the way this was played, it had some softness to it. It
Hmm.
connects me to my own sense of softness. And so it might mean we find a piece of music, and that can be a whole exploration in and of itself, right? The way that I work with recorded music is so much about slowing down,
Hmm.
about permission to get really specific, right? And this is
Hmm.
where HSPs we love this stuff because we notice nuance, right?
Yeah.
We live in that world. So for me to say to someone, we're going to take our time,
Hmm.
and I work a lot with an advanced technique called music and imagery, which uses recorded music and requires us to be so specific about the music that we use. So
Hmm.
it's not just me saying this is the piece for softness.
Right.
I mean, and so it gets away from that prescriptive stuff that those of us, who are around my age, I'm almost 40, we heard a lot of around like Mozart for the Mind and all of that stuff in the 90s. It gets away from that sort of prescriptive element of this is
Yeah.
the music for X, Y, and Z. And so we'll take our time. If, softness is the resource that someone wants to connect with, we'll take our time. I might give some options. We listen. I give such explicit permission. I literally say, I didn't compose any of these. I
Mm-hmm.
will not be offended if you tell me that's not quite it. I want to know. And I bring so much of my own curiosity, which is softness as well, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to be curious and to be locked down, to be tight physically, right?
Yes.
Curiosity comes, I think, with softness and openness. So I could talk forever about how the music connects to all of this.
It's so beautiful. I just think about an HSP getting to have that permission, that just being seen in their nuance and their layers of experience through that avenue, through that exploration. It just seems really powerful.
Totally.
And for you to invite them to say, what's your experience here?
Which is something that, I mean, I think a lot of my clients, but pretty much every HSP client that I've worked with has not really been asked, or if they've been
Yeah.
asked, it's not been enough, right? And I think
Yes.
a lot of us who are HSPs can relate to that, because we don't process like non-HSPs generally, to be asked with that openness, that curiosity of like, what's your experience? What's happening inside? Can you let the music come inside? Can you let it touch that place that, in your chest that feels knotted and hard? Can you breathe in some of the softness the music is offering? It's so nuanced, it's so slow, it's so permission based and curious and trauma informed and all the things, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It opens up, I imagine, so many layers of a conversation, and then just reconnecting to self through that.
Yeah.
And would you say it's safer to process through music than maybe just kind of traditional talking?
I'd say
Is
the
there
answer to that is it depends.
depends, sure.
Classic
Classic
therapist
therapist.
answer, right?
Yes.
Um, for some people, yes.
Hmm.
Absolutely. For some people, either they have told the same stories over and over and not gotten anywhere, and so music offers them a different option. But for some people, being open and vulnerable in the way that music can invite, doesn't have to, but can, might feel like too much. So
Mm-hmm.
that's when all of my trauma training comes in of like, we go
Yeah.
so slow. We titrate every little piece. And I explain to my clients what titration is,
Hmm.
right? Like I believe in being a really transparent therapist. And so I'll say like, oh, we need to slow down here. Have you heard of titration? Like I'll walk them through. Did
Yeah.
you hear of this in chemistry class in high school? And some of them have. I have forgotten it. But
Could you
um,
share for a list?
yeah.
Because I will often use that word too, and I was a plant biology major, so I
Mm.
remember actually titrating, but a lot of
Yes,
people
I'm
have
sure you
never
do.
done that. So could you share for folks in this capacity or context, I mean, what is titration? If you could share it with
Yeah, great
listeners.
question. Yeah, so
Yeah.
titration in this context, when you're working in therapy with potentially with someone who has a trauma history or just feels overwhelmed,
Hmm.
is essentially a little bit at a time, right? So in biology, which you could speak to far better than me, or chemistry, you like add a little bit of a substance and then you don't add it all, you add a little and you assess.
Yeah.
Then you maybe add a little more and then you assess. So it's sort of the same premise in therapy of we're not going to jump the way I work. We're not going to jump straight into let's pull out all the instruments and do an improvisation about how you feel about, I don't know, being an HSP in this world. Like, oh my goodness, it's overwhelming even for me to just say that. And
Yes.
that's the point, right? Like, but that's sort of what we might tend to do when we like vent, right? We just like open the floodgates and all the things come out. Um, and so titration might be, slowing down of like, okay, are you connected to your breath right now? No? Okay, let's do something around that. What would it be like to breathe together? What would it be like to make a little bit of sound together? Forget the instruments for a minute. That brings in a whole other thing.
Sure.
Can we hum together?
Mm.
What is it like to, these are just all options, right? What is it like if I play an instrument? And then at
Mm.
each part, we're assessing, I'm checking in, we're sort of, we might stay in any of those things I named for the rest of the session. This is not like
Yeah.
a checklist that we're marching down.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes just going slow and explaining to people, this is what we're doing, this is why I'm doing it, right? So that it is not a mystery, it's not some, blank slate therapist thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Can help actually. When we go slow, we can go deep, right? Which is something that I know that you know of, right? And all of us who work in these sensitive and attuned and trauma informed ways, we don't need to go fast
Yeah.
to make progress. Actually, the
Mm-hmm.
slower we go, often the more successful and the deeper we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a great reminder, though, that we can actually go deeper and do more healing when we slow it down. Such a good
Yeah.
reminder, not just in processing trauma or doing therapy, but in life,
Yes.
that there's so much value to slowing it down, going at your own pace as an HSP.
Hmm.
And just as you're talking, I was like, oh, how healing to really be with someone in that, I don't know, experiment almost, right? Just trying that on. Like,
Yeah.
it's okay to just meet yourself where you are right now.
It's such a huge thing, right? And again,
Amazing.
like in therapy, in life, in any other
Mm-hmm.
context, right? To rather than have to push through or to justify,
Yeah.
I hear that a lot with my clients, I hear it with myself, to just have that permission of like, I'm just going to hang out right here,
Yeah.
wherever the here is of the moment, right? In the
Mm-hmm.
upside down aerial yoga hammock, or
Right.
with this particular drum, or whatever it is, to not have to march down the checklist, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. How freeing to put that aside. No agenda.
Yeah. It
Mm-hmm.
is such a process, and I'll be honest that I am still in process without myself
Mm-hmm.
in my life, more so I'd say in my life than in my work, which is often how it is, I find. But it's a process that is very rich
Mm.
in the in the unfolding, in the discovery of, oh, I don't have to. Actually, this happened to me yesterday. It was a choice in the morning between like going hiking with my husband and my dog, or like doing some stuff that I wanted to
Mm.
get done. And my MO usually is you do the stuff and then you get the reward,
Right.
which absolutely comes from the way that I was raised.
Sure.
And I think just our society in general. And my husband is the opposite. He's not an HSP, but he is very sensitive in his own way and very attuned. And we've been playing with the what if we do it the way that is not my impulse for a while. And so we went hiking and we had lunch and we explored a new little town. And then I came home and sat on the, and I had a nap. And then I came home and
Mm.
sat on the deck. Yeah, it was lovely. And did the things, gave
Mm.
myself a container, right? Of like, I have an
Mm.
hour and a half. That's
Yeah.
it. And it
Yeah.
all got done.
Mm.
But it's such a constant learning and repetition for me of I don't have to push through in order to get the reward, in order to get the softness or the pleasure or whatever it is. It's such, I think that I will be learning and relearning that for a long time, if not forever, you know?
Yeah, right, that you don't have to earn the softness, earn the rest,
Mhm.
or the positive experience. You don't have to work for it.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
oh, what you said about earning the positive experience, like that comes up a lot, I find, with clients of,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's often this idea that like therapy is all catharsis, it's all digging deep, unrooting, unearthing trauma.
Yes.
And positive experiences, what does that mean? Like,
Right.
that for a lot of people, that's not in their language and their way of thinking about therapy.
Yeah.
And the way that I work is that we need those positive experiences in therapy. We need them in life, obviously, as we were talking
Yeah.
about, but like in therapy, we need to be able to laugh together. We need to, any positive experience, like to be able to, for a client to share something that felt good, right? For us to pause and say, actually, we're not going to go back to, whatever the particular trauma story or something like that. We're going to stay with that which feels good. And I often make this gesture that I'm making right now of like,
Mm.
it's so precious, right? It's kind
Yeah.
of like holding a baby bird. Like, too fast or too loud,
Yeah, just
because it's so precious. It
yeah.
deserves that attention and that softness, right?
Mm.
And so often we just barrel through.
We really do, and I think well, therapy is there's space for everything in therapy, but especially I think putting more emphasis on the good because we don't have that permission in life to savor.
Right.
So can we hold on and can we actually acknowledge, look at this.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful and precious and sacred and something good just happened. And there,
Yeah. I
let's
mean,
take it in.
yeah, right. It feels so simple, but
It's so
really,
hard.
it's so hard and it's so unusual in so many ways. Like,
Yeah.
what leads people to therapy, if I could distill it down, is too much of something or not enough of something,
Yes,
or a
exactly.
combination of those, right? And so no one comes to therapy saying, I have had so many good experiences lately. I would like more of those. That's not why we go to therapy. That's not why I started therapy, right? And so, but positive experiences are so reparative, right?
Yeah.
Particularly for people. And a lot of my clients, I sort of work at the intersection of HSP, anxiety, and childhood trauma. And usually there's a pretty clear Venn diagram between those
Yeah.
three.
Yep.
And so a lot of times my clients have not had enough of certain important, like formative experiences of being seen, of being heard, of not being shamed, of being supported, whatever it might be. Right.
Yeah.
So therapy is then a space in a relationship, and it doesn't matter how old they are, where they can have reparative experiences of, I'm going to slow down with you. I'm going to wait until you finish your sentence. I'm not going to tell you you're too much, right? Like all of that. And so it can be so healing. And that's the positive stuff too, of like, again, like this, the baby word thing of, oh, here you matter. It's
Exactly.
so important.
Oh, it's so incredibly important to be seen, to be in a safe relationship, to have someone make space for you and
Yeah.
honor who you are, and you don't need to change anything.
Yeah.
How
It's so
beautiful is
big.
that? Yeah, it's
So big.
incredibly powerful.
Mm.
And yeah, we don't often come to we don't usually come to therapy when something good is happening,
Right.
but we can make space for what's good once we get there.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
love it. I wanted to go back to something you said earlier, which you said,
Yeah.
you're bringing in music and imagery, and I'm
Hmm.
just curious if you could say more about that component of the process because I love hearing about the music, but I'm wondering how the imagery piece also comes in.
Totally.
Yeah.
So in music and imagery, there's two ways it can look. We
Mm,
can have a resource oriented focus, and we can have sort of an issue oriented focus. So that's like a point of tension or discomfort, anxiety, anger, a memory, whatever it
mm,
is. And so in both of those, there is imagery, right? So there usually is some imagery that comes up or some body sensation that comes up when we land on the focus, right? So let's say someone says, I'll just stay with softness because we've been
mhm,
talking about softness. I want to feel more of that. I'm disconnected from softness. Okay, can you think of a memory? Can be 10 minutes ago, 10 years ago, doesn't matter, that connects you to softness. Most people will find something. If they don't, that's when finding stuff around us or whatever it might be comes in. But most people will find a memory. And so when we have memory, we have imagery. Okay, can you drop yourself back into that memory just for a moment? Eyes open, eyes closed, doesn't matter. Um, what do you notice about being in that, let's say, standing next to that lake?
mm,
Oh, my feet are on the soft grass, right? I'm feeling the warmth of the sun. So we've got imagery already. And then that helps us choose music to just amplify and stay with, right? This is a staying with experience. So staying with something that feels like a resource, staying with something that feels like it has tension. And I can talk more about that.
mm,
And so then the music that we choose for softness, for a resource, we, like I said before, we take our time with choosing the music. I might give options. They might have thoughts of certain music or instruments or whatever it is. And then the music, whatever piece it is, it loops.
mm.
So it just, that makes it so, so safe, so predictable. It's just this lovely container
Love
that you can just kind of soak in,
Mm.
right? So as opposed to like, we listen once and okay, like on to the next thing, we might spend 15, 20 minutes listening to the same piece of music.
Mm.
So there is a slowing down, there is a taking in. And as clients are listening, they're creating an image on a piece of paper. So really
Mm.
simple. It does not, I always share that I really can't draw anything
Mhm.
representationally. I drew a window the other day. I was very proud of myself. But so when I do this in my own personal practice, it's very abstract, just colors and shapes. And so the idea is just staying with the music, staying with any imagery that's coming up, any sensation, just putting it on the page.
Mm.
And really, and it's my job to keep track of time so that clients don't have to. I have a lot of clients who like want to take care of me and
Mhm.
all of that. And so that then they might draw the image they initially came up with. The music might actually bring them something new.
Mm.
Like, oh, when the violin came in, all of a sudden I left the lake and I was on this cloud, or whatever it is. Like I'm just spitballing here,
Yeah.
but these are all pieces that I've heard over the years. Um, and so then that ends up on the page. And so the imagery that comes up that the music can evoke, I am constantly surprised in so many beautiful ways because music is just that powerful.
Mhm.
And when we choose it so intentionally, it will bring something. We don't always know exactly what, right? We might start with softness and end up with release or end up with
Mm.
openness, and that's okay, right? The music is
Mhm.
bringing something else that's needed, and it's working on such an implicit level. It's so beautiful.
That's incredibly powerful that you're allowed to be in the process and slow things down enough to savor and to let it impact you. I think those HSPs were often so rushed and we don't usually get to just be with ourselves and our internal experience. And here it's like you're really immersing in it and just seeing what could come out of
Mm-hmm.
that and
That
letting it,
openness, yeah.
yeah, letting it shift and change as it needs to. Wow, how
Yeah.
powerful.
I'm wondering if I should speak to what I put over here, to like
Yeah,
yeah,
the tension.
yeah,
Yeah, I would love to hear about that part too, what that looks
totally.
like. Yeah.
So a lot of the HSPs that I work with, and myself as well, being overwhelmed is a thing, right?
Yes.
And again, that sort of also lives at the confluence, I think that's the word I want, of anxiety and childhood trauma and HSP, like being overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of my HSP clients, being told for years, you're too much, you're too angry, you're too sensitive, you're too whatever,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't help. That's an understatement. And so sort of issue oriented music and imagery is about staying with tension, right? We so often will hear, and a lot of therapists will say this, we have to feel the feeling to move through the feeling,
Right.
or we have to feel it to heal it, or I can't think of any other catchphrases. But it is a hard thing for a lot of people to, what does that mean to just feel it? Like, I'm
Right.
overwhelmed by feeling it already, why would I want to feel it more?
Right.
I have I've had a lot of HSP clients who struggle with anger,
Mm-hmm.
right? And which is so common, right? And so they would look at me like I was, like I had three heads if I said, like, let's just talk more about your anger. They're already angry.
Right.
They've already had so many harmful experiences around anger, around how they experience their anger. Either it's overwhelming and it's flooding, or it gets pushed down in a way, which
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean they don't feel it, right? We know this. And so if we take anger as an example, then the focus is on staying with the feeling in a way that feels okay.
Yeah.
So there may be less repeats than there are when we're doing a resource.
Mm-hmm.
There may be the same amount. It really does depend. How many times a piece repeats is not up to me, it's up to the client.
Mm.
So if it's one, it's one. If it's five, it's five. Doesn't matter really. Um, so then if anger is the focus for the tension, then I'll ask again. There might be a memory, might be recent, might be long ago. They might know how anger feels in their body. And then we're just finding a piece of music that matches it. And so there's a lot of nuance in that, right? Anger can be so many different, every feeling can be
Yeah.
so many different things, but anger can be so many different things. And so I have like a pool of music that has angry qualities to it, whatever that might
Mm-hmm.
mean for different people, right? It's different things
Mm-hmm.
for different people. And so again, we'll take our time to go through and say, oh, the drum beat is too loud on this one, or actually I want it faster, or, you know, you know, sometimes it's so random. One time I found like a cello cover of, it was painted black or something, and that was
Uh-huh.
like perfect for a client. Who knows, right? We never know exactly what will land. And then it's about, can we stay with it? And the idea with staying with the feeling is to build a new relationship to it,
Hmm.
right? And sometimes that happens pretty quickly. Sometimes it takes, revisiting this feeling. But
Yeah.
essentially, that's why we want to stay with the challenging feeling, is to transform it, not
Yeah.
necessarily to transform it into something beautiful and sunny and, any of that, but to transform our experience of it, right? So if it's anger, like, and there are other options
Hmm.
with anger, right? It's not just overwhelm or avoidance. That's just the two that I tend to see most often. But those become people's defaults. And a lot of the clients I work with, they've been responding to anger in those ways for decades,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
it's not all of a sudden like, yeah, absolutely express your anger. They don't know, they don't want to, which is fair, and they
Hmm.
don't know where to start. And there's also, I should add, the component of I am right there with them in the anger.
Yeah.
That is reparative. That is
Hmm.
hugely reparative for people, for clients who have never had that, who have been shamed or judged or, anything else, maligned in any way for their anger.
Hmm.
Right. And so me being able to say, oh yeah, like I think I have a piece that might match this. Like I've done a lot of my own work around anger. That was something that was tricky for me for a long time. So in
Hmm.
order to be able to work this closely with anger and so many other feelings, but particularly anger, I had to do a lot of my own work around it, to not be afraid of it within myself, to be able to stay with it, for anger to be this generative, informative feeling as opposed to something that was explosive and then otherwise ignored.
Hmm.
So personal work and for any therapist, but if I'm talking about myself, personal work has been huge, right?
Yes.
And then the staying with the piece, usually by the end of the repeats, whether it's one, whether it's five, something has shifted, right?
Hmm.
Whether it's, oh, that wasn't as bad as I thought, which that statement in and of itself is huge, right?
Huge.
Or, oh, the anger reminded me of how tall I can be or how strong I
Mm.
am, right? The music, again, the music bringing something, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's, oh, the cello could be heard over everything else. That's appealing. I like that. Like
Mm.
having a strong voice, right? Like sort of getting something out of it. And those, we talk about it afterwards. There's always what's called in music and imagery a postlude,
Mm.
or like a wrap up, a debrief, whatever we want to call it, to notice what happened in your experience.
Yeah.
That's so important. Otherwise it
Hmm.
just stays internal. We have to make meaning out of it.
Hmm.
And so then there's time, at least like 10-15 minutes usually, to talk about, what was your experience like? What did the music do? What surprised you? And the surprise one, I love that question, because so often when we respond to different feelings in these default ways,
Hmm.
we are no longer surprised, right? We're like, oh yeah, look at
Right.
that. I did the thing again, whatever the thing is, right? And that usually leads to some self-criticism, at least it does for me. And so to be able to be surprised by your
Hmm.
feelings, by your responses to them, that's exciting. I find it exciting.
Hmm.
And generative and new. And when there's sort of a little something new, there's a thread to follow there, right? We've got something to come back to and continue
Hmm.
to pay attention to. It's like sort of little seedlings, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's inspiring hope in me just thinking about that. Like, oh, I can see this same emotion or the same response to an emotion or attention with fresh eyes
Yeah.
in a new way.
Yeah.
Um, and you can actually transform your relationship with it and be more curious and playful, even see the different layers of it while you're with another safe person.
Mhm.
Like, I see you as a guide through this, kind of
Mhm.
like,
It's exactly how it's
I don't
described
know,
in
just kind of
this
like going
method.
through
Yeah.
this forest almost, or
Mhm.
this maze of
Mhm.
anger or emotion in any way. And I really just want to point out that you said, that emotion, that anger, it can be informative. So what
Yes.
can we learn from it in this? That's,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
ah, incredible.
I I talk a lot about anger, which is so funny to me sometimes, because like I said, I had such a difficult relationship to anger myself for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
But the past few years, especially, and I think to be honest, like what's been happening in our world since the pandemic and before the pandemic has
Yeah.
many things have made me angry.
Yeah.
Um,
Same.
and yeah, and sometimes, and I would rather be angry than shut down,
Yeah.
right? Than numb out. And look, I
Yeah.
have my moments. I'm only human,
Hmm.
but that anger is so informative, right?
Yeah.
It can be so generative. It's led me to make
Yes.
decisions, to advocate in ways that I, as that shy kid who couldn't like talk to the kid in front of her in math class, I never thought I would do any of these things, right?
Hmm.
So following that thread of, oh, I'm angry and what can I do? Right. And also,
Mm.
how can I express it? Right. Like, how can I express it? And I do a lot of my own personal work still around like what piece of music can hold and match my anger. Not like
Mm.
match it and then calm it down, but match it
Hmm.
and stay right with it. Right.
Yeah.
Like that is so holding of like, no, I'm gonna, and it's what we do as therapists all the time of like, I'm with you wherever you are, right?
Yeah.
The music being able to communicate that too.
Absolutely.
It's so cool.
It's amazing. And this is what I love about more experiential therapy is that you can use different tools, if you will,
Yeah.
to go into your experience in a safer, more exploratory way and actually, I mean, learn a lot about yourself. It's so supportive for HSPs when we have all
Mhm.
that depth inside of us.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just off the top of my head,
Yeah.
if how can people use music in their day-to-day lives outside of the therapy room? Is there a way
Mhm.
that you bring music into your everyday experience?
Yeah. There's so many ways. I think one that I often will talk about is there's two things I'm thinking of right now. One of
Hmm.
them is playlists. And I think
Hmm.
a lot of us create playlists. This is nothing revolutionary. There's something to be said for creating specific like feelings playlists and doing it when you're feeling fine is the biggest thing, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like which is something like we're all human again, like if my shoulders are feeling fine, I'm probably less likely to do my stretches, like we know how it goes.
Yep.
But creating different playlists when you're feeling fine, listening to them, getting familiar with them, so that it's building the muscle so that when you're feeling
Mm.
angry or you're feeling sad or whatever it is, you have it already, right? You're not like randomly searching through Spotify, or not even looking through Spotify because you're so dysregulated,
Mm-hmm.
so creating those tools ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. It also is the permission giving of like, you're going to have feelings.
Yeah.
I do not know a single person in this world, myself included, who like never feels angry or never feels anxious or never feels sad, whatever.
Right.
It's just not a thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that acceptance of you will have some struggles.
Yeah.
And like it's like a gift to like future you, if you will, of
Yes.
like, here, I am handing you this playlist. And it doesn't have to be long or complex. Some of mine have like 3 songs on them,
Mm-hmm.
you know but I really love doing that for myself. I love encouraging clients to do that. And then the other thing that I like to talk about a lot musically that people can do on their own is humming.
Yes.
And that's something that I talk about a lot. I do with a lot of clients. And so humming is so calming for the central nervous system. It is so simple. You don't need any tools, you don't need any equipment. You just need literally yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do it anywhere. I do it when I'm stuck at a really long red light.
Mm-hmm.
I've done it on the subway in New York City. For those of you who live in cities, if you try to match pitch with the subway car, no one will hear you when it's moving.
Incredible.
Yeah. And I always say, this is my little like, thing. Even if they do, you're probably not the weirdest thing that's happening on the subway.
No.
So it's really not a big deal. So yeah, humming is a big one for me. I have a like a little track on Insight Timer that is a 2-minute
Mm,
like guided humming
great.
track where I do it with you and
Excellent.
just like, walk you through it. So that's
Mm.
that's something that I talk about a lot. It's an internal massage essentially, and it's great also
Oh.
for people who struggle with meditating
Mm-hmm.
and things like that, which is something that I have an on and off relationship with.
Mm-hmm.
So humming has a little bit of that stillness, but also a little bit of movement to it, a little bit of
Feeling.
vibration. It doesn't,
Yes.
when I hum with people or when I walk them through it and on the track, it's not about how it sounds. You don't need to be a singer.
Right.
and the humming that this sort of humming, as opposed to like humming along with a song where there will be like melodic variation, it's just you pick a note and you
Hmm.
just sustain it until your breath runs out.
Hmm.
And this isn't about like compressing the breath to get all the breath out or anything like that,
Right.
but as if the breath, an image that I like is as if the breath is like a conveyor belt at the
Hmm.
supermarket, which is even nicer because it always comes back around, right?
Yes.
Because there will be more breath. And then the hum is just like a little item, a really light item that you just place on top of it and it rides until it's done,
Hmm. I
as
love
opposed to
that.
like, because we can, particularly those of us who are prone to anxiety in any way, we can sort of create a lot of tension when we hum or when we breathe or when we try to meditate. And it's actually going back to softness, like you can be so soft with it. There can be softness here,
Yeah.
softness inside the mouth, softness here,
Hmm.
holding something soft, right? It doesn't have to be, a tension filled, productive, being as loud as possible kind of thing.
Right. It can be gentle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, you can kind of show up to it however feels right to you. Like you said, you don't have to
Totally.
be on pitch, you don't have to do it in any
Yeah.
certain way, you don't have to force it. Just
Yeah.
let it be
You
what
could
it
do it
is.
laying down. You could do it in the shower. By the way,
Mhm.
everyone sounds amazing when they hum in the shower. The acoustics, the tiles, the water, I don't quite know, but
Yes,
it's so
it's
good.
magic.
Yeah, and it's just a lot of people just find that relaxing. So, for those
Mhm.
listening, like if you love to take like showers or baths or anything, it's just a nice thing to just integrate.
Yeah.
Um, it's also something that you can do when you're doing something else, right? And so like for the habit stackers among us, like rather
Yes.
than adding like one more thing to do, sometimes I'll do it when I'm like doing the dishes or walking the dog when the dog is
Yeah.
taking forever in one spot.
Right.
Um, and it's just a nice thing to just like gently lay on top of something else you're doing. Like when I'm waiting at
Absolutely.
the red light, I'm gonna be waiting there either way, right? So
Mm-hmm. Might as well do a little self-regulation.
yeah, why
Yeah,
not?
why not? Well, Maya, I'm wondering as we wrap up, is there any message you'd like to leave for our HSP listeners?
Mm, such a good question. I guess since we've been talking about softness a lot, I think I'll just stay there of inviting people to connect a little bit with softness and remembering that you deserve it.
Yes, you deserve it.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, again, thank you so much. I just loved our conversation today.
Too.
It was so rich. And I'll be sure to share your website, your Instagram in the show notes for
Thank
folks. Is
you.
that the best way for people to
Yeah,
connect with you?
it is.
Beautiful. I love it.